Do you want to roll the intro? You do the. I've done the intro the last 4 weeks. You should do it.
I'm fine.
I don't want to make a routine.
Fine. No, I'm fine. I'm fine with you doing it. Unless you just don't want to.
No, it's fine. I always end up doing this, and I fucking hate it. But it's
I can do it.
Okay, you can do it. You do it.
Oh man.
See, now you're thinking about it. You're in your head. Maybe this is the real intro. Maybe this is the real pre-in.
You'd think I would have some practice introing a podcast, and
it turns out though I did one that's by accident. One evolved over time, and then the other one was just hello. Here's the show. I'm the people, and here's the other people.
That's so formal.
I know.
Okay, hang on. It's coming to me.
You got it.
I think I can do this. Okay.
Remember, you're gonna have to do this thousands of times, so don't fuck it up.
Hey, Will, it's the 5th episode of our Tech Pod.
Whoa, the 5th episode? I thought last week was the 5th episode.
Nope. We established that zeros are not numbers.
I'm pretty sure zero is a number, but welcome. Hey, everybody, I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
Hello.
This is our Tech Podcast.
Brad, have you ever wanted to know the future?
Kind of, and also not at all.
Look, in the 80s, did you want to know the future?
Yes. Okay, yes. There was definitely a time 20 to 25 years ago when the future seemed like it might be cool.
In the early 2000s, did you want to know the future?
As time went along, it became less appealing.
Do you know why Tim Cook is the president of Apple?
Yes, because people talk about him like a supply chain wizard.
He is a supply chain
because he was the guy who got the products made quickly.
That's because the reason he is the CEO. Because the supply chain is the most important part of the whole thing. All of the design crap, that's what gets the people on stages excited. But if you want to know why we have iPhones, supply chain's the thing that's important.
It's Tim Cook.
Tim Cook's the man. So supply chain.
That's the topic.
Is when you start thinking about how you make something instead of like going to the hardware store and getting the parts you need and jamming it together. Like if you're putting a flapper in your toilet, you go to the store, you get the kit, whatever.
Right. Or even if you're making like a cabinet, you build it like you might even get like raw lumber or raw wood of some type and like design and build it yourself. Nobody is making their own homemade bespoke iPhone.
I'm sure somebody is, but it's a bad idea. You shouldn't try to do that. What's the worldwide capacity for manufacture of cabinets, though? How many cabinets can the whole world make? All the cabinet makers.
What are the variables in the equation? Like manpower, materials, time. I guess that's
facilities, probably.
Okay, space.
Like you have to have the right kind of shop to build cabinets, right? You have to have table saws.
Availability.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Apple over the last 20 years did a really good job with this. Like they sussed this out really early, and you can tell if looking back, it's really clear. Like they launched iPods. And that saved their business in a lot of ways. But then they shifted those iPods from hard drives, which are kind of crappy for what people were using them for, because they had moving parts, and that when the hard drive heads crash into the disks, things go bad.
Yeah, it's actually kind of crazy to think that people walked around with a tiny hard drive in their pocket and like jogged with it.
Jogging,
the amount of jostling that those hard drives went through is like kind of it's terrifying to think about now.
It's amazing any of them survived.
Yeah, right.
Which is why when they switched to flash memory with the iPod Nano, it made a lot of sense. But you went from a product that could hold, I think what Steve held up the first iPod was like 1,000 songs in your pocket. And then the Nano came out and it was like, you could fit a few hundred songs in your pocket, which is more than enough. But it's a step back. Usually the numbers go up.
Yeah.
But the thing about the iPod launching the Nano is that by creating a product that increased demand for flash memory dramatically, they increased the world supply of flash memory.
Because what was using flash memory prior to the iPod? Can you even think of
SD cards, cards for cameras,
like digital cameras.
flash cards, SD cards.
Yeah.
There were some MP3 players that used flash cards as well.
The Diamond Rio.
Brad
and Will made Tech Pod's favorite official pocket MP3 player, the Diamond Rio.
Do you remember that thing used a parallel port? You plugged it into a parallel port. It had a really weird connector and you plugged it into the parallel port because everything else was too slow.
I'm pretty sure I've mentioned that I have one of those in a drawer somewhere that someone I know gave me at their garage sale, and I don't think they gave me a cable with it, so I don't know that I'll ever be able to use it.
I have the cable. We can get ours together. We have an MP3 player party if
Fantastic. All right, great.
But anyway, so the world supply of flash memory was relatively small at that point. People were using them for digital cameras, digital photo frames, stuff like that. Embedded systems was where a lot of flash memory used to go. It was like, that means things like car computers and stereos and things like that. Things that you maybe don't think have a computer but do. And as a result, the world supply of flash memory really skyrocketed because the iPod Nano, they sold 1 million units in 17 days. And that meant that the people that make flash memory suddenly were able to build bigger factories because there was more demand for their product and they needed to make more. And if you extrapolate that stuff out, it's complicated with flash memory because a lot of stuff was using flash memory. But there's a really good example that I use in a talk that I used to do about accelerometers. So, the iPhone. I guess the first one, they've always had an accelerometer, but in the early days, it was a standalone like device. It wasn't even an integrated circuit. It was just a thing on the board.
It was packed in there.
Yeah, and it was just an accelerometer, no gyroscope. So accelerometers can tell when something's moving relative to its previous position, but they can't tell orientation with relation to gravity. So if you have an accelerometer and a gyroscope, then you can tell like where the center of the Earth is, the direction toward the center of the Earth, and the translational movement of the object. So orientation and movement. They added one of those in the iPhone 10. Sorry, the iPhone 4 in 2010. Prior to that, IMUs, a chip that would tell you that have a gyroscope and an accelerometer cost, I think $6 in 2006. Sorry,
Okay.
$3. Quantities of 1,000, you could buy a chip, an IMU chip, for about $3. So it was an expensive item.
What is that? Inertial measuring unit or something like that?
Yeah, inertial measurement unit, I think, is what the M stands for. The I is inertial, the U is unit. I don't know what the M is for. But they sold those for $3 each, which in motherboard and phone terms is phenomenally expensive.
Right.
When you're talking to ASUS and they're like, well, we could put a USB-C port on this motherboard, but it's going to cost us an extra 1/10 of a cent. They have to really think about that, right? Like that's a serious business decision.
Not to digress too much, but is ASUS the official pronunciation of that company on this podcast?
I have been told by the representatives of ASUS over the years that the company's name is ASUS.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that for years as well, but it just is so hard to get my head around.
It's Ubisoft. Ubisoft. Ubisoft is the name of our insider UB News podcast.
Yep.
Ubisoft, ASUS, Acer. I think that they changed it to ASUS from ASUS to get away from Acer.
Aha.
When that split happened.
That would make sense. Everything is down to marketing.
I don't know if that's true, but that's the thing I always heard. So IMU chips, $3 in cost of in units of 1,000 in 2006. The iPhone has an accelerometer in 2007 when it launches. In 2010, the iPhone 4 added the IMU chip. The price went down. That drove the worldwide price for anybody, not just Apple. Like if I go to an IC store and I'm like, hey, I need 1,000 IMU chips, it then costs me 65 cents a unit, which is still expensive in that world, but not that bad. And now they're just built into the system on the chips that you buy with everything. You pay nothing. They're smaller. They use less power. They're better across the board. And those IMU chips being like trending toward costing nothing, basically have enabled a ton of other technology that sprung up around them that is based on low cost or free IMU chips, like drones.
This is how progress is made.
Yeah. So if you look at, hey, how do you get to a point that IMU chips are going to be cheap enough for me to put in like a kid's toy or put 15 of them in a drone or put them in a 3D printer or wherever there are weird places you find a use to measure movement. You can look and see what people are jamming into phones and devices that they're going to sell a literal billion of and see what's coming next by extrapolating what people are going to use that new technology for when it gets cheap.
So if you're a company the size and influence of Apple, like you're not, when you set out to concept an entire new product line, like say the iPhone or whatever, like it's not necessarily just a process of looking what's already available on the market in quantity to work with, but also what forces you can kind of manipulate to bring about new supplies that you don't already have access to, right?
I think that's the difference between companies that are really successful at you know, if you think about it, the iPhone, it was a product that seemed like magic, right? It was a thing that, like, compared to a Windows mobile phone or a BlackBerry at the time, having a real web browser and having enough storage to actually use it as a small computer was a real turn, and that was because they had done the things to get to the point that they could afford to sell that device for $600 with, I think, 8 gigs of flash memory. It wasn't very much. It was a
Yeah.
tiny amount of flash memory at the time.
I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm part of like the cult of Steve Jobs or anything, but like I think that the original, you remember the original iPhone stage announcement? Like I think that is maybe the only product announcement I've ever gone back multiple times on YouTube and watched.
It's astounding.
Just for the entertainment value. Like I mean, you remember the whole like the stagecraft of like we're not announcing one product today, we're announcing three. It's like what was it, like an internet communicator, a brand new iPod, and like a something else,
and a web browser for your pocket.
A phone or something
a
like
phone.
that.
Yeah, phone, a web browser, and a MP3 player.
And then, of course, the Magic Jobs moment of it's not three products, it's one. Here it is,
and it fits in your pocket.
That thing was insane. Like I remember, we didn't. By we, I mean the people I was working with at the time. None of us got iPhones until the next year for the 3G.
Okay. Which was the right choice, just to be clear. The first gen one was abandoned really fast. Like it was, anyway.
But I distinctly remember because it came out early June, I want to say. It came out like a week or two before E3 that year.
Mm-hmm.
And we all went and got iPhone 3Gs right before E3.
Oh, no.
And all of us were completely losing our minds for the entirety of E3 because, I mean, that's like I mean, I don't want to say it's like a high pressure environment, but a trade show is an environment where like you need to navigate a lot, you need to look things up a lot. You know what I mean? And suddenly having this thing at your fingertips at just the moment that you need to access all this information while you're out in the world was like that was the future is here moment like I maybe have never had before.
It was one of those moments because it's funny, that same E3 is the one that while getting out of the car in the parking garage at SFO, my OG iPhone, my launch iPhone, fell out of my pocket and the screen broke.
Oof.
And I could swipe 90% of the way across to unlock it, but it wouldn't get the last 2 pixels.
You didn't want to lacerate your finger just to get it done?
Well, and it was the first time I'd ever gone to a trade show without like a massive, like usually in the old days, you would print your appointment schedule. So I'd have all my appointments printed. Yep. So I knew where I needed to be and when, and I didn't do that year for the first time. I was like, well, I'm just fucked. So I went to an AT&T store when I got there and bought a BlackBerry because I could hook it into our Outlook system at work and like get my calendar.
Yeah.
But it was like that moment, the first moment that you go there and you're like, oh, I don't have to take my laptop out for every computing task that I need, was a really, really big deal. And it happened because Apple started making color iPods. So they got LCD production screen and the pixel densities they wanted up. They did flash memory on the nanos and the shuffles, and they sold bazillions of those. So they got the capacity for flash memory up and built relationships with Samsung and the other people that were making flash memory for them at the time. And it carries forward into things like, barometric pressure sensors, which are in all of our phones now, nobody knows. And air quality sensors, which are in a bunch of Android phones now. I think even the iPhone 10 Plus has an air quality ppm sensor. And that empowers things like now you can buy a weather station for like $200 that connects to Bluetooth, and you put in your backyard inside your house, and it tells you how much particulates in the air, what your carbon monoxide percentages are, how much light the thing gets, what the temperature is, what the relative humidity is, wind, all of these things. And all of these things happen because like these things are on phones. All these chips are on phones.
That tech has all matured through economy of scale. When are we going to get a Geiger counter in our iPhone? That's
so there's a company called Safecast
that's run by. Expecting a serious answer to this.
Oh yeah, so they these folks named Safecast. I think it's run by Sean Bonner, who is he's an early blog guy. He did LA. I want to say Gothamist and LAist were part of his network, but I may be thinking of a different one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He has a company called Safecast, and they build they're like the size of a Walkman. Like they're boxes that are about the size of an old school like cassette player Walkman.
Okay.
And so like for somebody who's under 40, I don't know, it's like
Wait, is that where we're
4 inches. Yeah, we got to explain this shit. I had to
at?
explain the TV used to only have 4 channels to my daughter the other day, and she
Yeah,
just didn't
that's fair.
believe. She was like, "That's a lie, Dad. You're messing with me." Um, it's like 4 inches by 6 inches probably, and
Yeah,
it's in a
sure.
waterproof container, like a translucent waterproof container. It has inputs for air quality intake, and then it also has like radiation detectors for I think alpha, gamma. It's two of the three types of radiation because one of them doesn't matter. I think it's alpha is helium particles, beta is I can't. Anyway, I don't remember. But the point is, it measures the two types of bad radiation, and they set them up all over, and they work in a mesh network or with cell radios. So they set them up all around Fukushima
Oh wow.
after
Okay.
the nuclear reactor melted down there, and they use them to like get a really good hyper local representation of air quality, temperature, radiation, stuff like that. For whatever you can go to their site and see that they the data is public. You can go see the data, and they have sensors set up all over LA and I think Northern California now too.
So what you're
Um,
saying is not only does the tech exist, but it may actually work its way into a phone at some point.
I don't know if it'll work its way into a phone, but yeah, it's like it's there, and you can like their whole their it's a citizen science thing. So they sell kits that you can build one and put it on your like you can plug it into your wall and have a station in your backyard, just like you would have a
I'm
weather station on
I'm
underground
I'm
or
just
something
looking
like that.
forward to Apple's skeuomorphic interpretation of that creepy clicky sound they make. We'll see.
It's
Yeah,
just
that's
gonna be a haptic bump every time you do it.
yep.
Bump bump
I mean,
bump
remember
bump
we're in the
bump.
bad future, so this is inevitable.
We deserve the future we've gotten.
Yeah. So like I was gonna say, just to expand on what we were talking about earlier. I mean, like when you talk about like somebody like a Tim Cook being really good at supply chain, and then the way you've reframed this for me, where you're saying it's not just about when you're designing a new product, looking at what you already have to work with, but making bets on creating enough market demand to create the supply that you're going to need. Like that's where there are enough, like you're making enough gambles and placing enough bets that I can start to see why people that are really
Yeah.
good at solving this equation without all the pieces already on the board are kind of as respected as they are. Does that make sense?
Well, so there's some more classic examples. Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. Google did the same thing with Gmail. Remember in on April Fool's Day in 2003 when Google was like, "Hey, we're doing a Google Moonbase, and also you can have 1,000 gigabytes of storage in your
Yeah.
email. Sign up for a beta invite today."
Yeah, it seemed like didn't they have it set up so that you could like look at the offer page and watch the number go up in real time?
It used to be on the bottom of the page of your Gmail. I don't know if it's still there. I don't know if Gmail has a bottom anymore. Yeah, it does. Um, oh no, now it tells you how much space you have because I'm paying for 2 terabytes of storage.
Yeah,
So
and I think they've locked it now, but like it was, if I remember correctly, they had it set up like that, and that's like a stroke of marketing genius, to say like, hey, you get 1,000 gig or whatever, and then you can watch the number like slowly climb as you're signing up for the service.
well, so they did that because somebody at Google was like looking at how many hard drives they were buying, and they were like, oh, we're buying a boatload of hard drives every year, but the cost per gigabyte or yeah, probably per megabyte at the time, but I guess per gigabyte. Cost per
Yeah,
gigabyte at the time was like doing one of those like hard down into the right curves. It had reached the point where it was going off the cliff and was just trending towards zero. And they were like, look, we have to buy all these hard drives for the servers. We can't buy 150 megabyte hard drives, which is all the Google the compute servers need and stuff like that. So we have all this slack space. We can use that for other stuff, and they figured out how to kind of partition it off and use it for other things. And then they were like, look, we can, if we want to get people to sign up for our accounts, because remember at the time before Gmail, who had a Google account? You didn't need a Google account. Search
yeah,
wasn't personalized.
sure.
You just logged in and everybody got the same search results everybody else did.
God, I feel like such a dupe now.
I mean, yeah, we traded, we let arbitrary people run code on our computers in exchange for hot takes. That was a bad decision.
Uh huh.
And we traded all of our personal identifiable information for email with pretty good spam filters and a gigabyte of storage.
Yeah, and some cloud storage that we never really
Yeah.
used.
Yeah, and then the ability to share photos with our family and friends and people we went to high school with, we traded for Western democracy. So,
Oh man,
pros and cons.
bad
Yeah,
future.
bad future. Bad future.
Yeah.
But I mean, the same thing's happening now with compute. right? So the rise of GPU computing, and as we see like quantum stuff coming online, which is a little further out, but is going to change things dramatically.
Wait, is that
Like the
actually happening?
cost, hmm?
Is quantum computing
That's
actually
real.
happening?
It's a real
I mean,
thing.
I know it's been in research, or it's been under or in a research phase for a very long time. But my understanding was like we weren't going to see anything practical executed with it in our lifetimes, or like it just seemed like a lot of wishful thinking. Let's say.
It has in the last 5 years. It's gone from are you familiar with the idea of like 5 years off technology being not really 5 years off? Like
Oh,
you always hear about we talked about it a little bit with I think monitor stuff. Like OLEDs for a long time were a 5 years off technology, and then it took 15 years for them to
oh,
actually
yeah,
become
yeah,
a
yeah. Sure.
market, a thing that
Yes.
you see in the market and can buy.
Yep.
Uh, like mainly because they required different manufacturing. Like people had to build factories in order to build OLED panels and stuff like that. So when somebody has to figure out how to make something, how to build something, it's not a 5 years off technology, especially if you're talking about building it at scale. Quantum computers, they're doing like there are now people running quantum computers that are doing computations that are impossible, unwieldy to impossible on a normal computer. They're maybe not practical
Yeah,
computations,
I
but
didn't realize there were any even exist like extant and doing work right now. I thought that the sort of the computational model was like existed theoretically, but that they hadn't actually built any yet. Or maybe I was
they're not doing practical work. They're doing theoretical work still,
okay.
but they exist.
Okay. Huh. Yeah, right. Also holographic storage cubes.
That's a whole different problem. Well, your NAND flash in your new Intel SSDs is 3 dimensional, so it's
That's
multiple
okay. Yeah,
layers.
sure.
Yeah,
That's
it's not a
yeah.
hollow cube
No.
though. But yeah, the same thing's happening with compute, which is why like when you upload your photos to Google Photos, it'll look at the photos and it's like, okay, these 20,000 pictures are of babies, and these 18,000 pictures are of dogs, and these 240,000 pictures are of your every meal you've eaten for the last 20 years.
Right.
So, and they can do all that because the cost of compute is basically trending toward zero now.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I guess that's another good example of like the popularity of iPhones and Android phones, or smartphones, I should say,
Yeah,
pushing ARM and pushing mobile processors, and then that stuff is trickling down into like Raspberry Pis and other non like consumer focused products. I mean, the Pi, I guess, is kind of consumer focused, but like that stuff is a little more hobbyist, a little more enthusiast. But you're getting access to a lot more horsepower in places that you didn't have it before for super cheap.
for what is a Raspberry Pi 4, the loaded one is like $50, I think,
Right.
and it's
Right.
probably better than any computer I had until maybe 10 years ago.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a moment, I think around the time we started Tested, when I looked at my iPhone specs and I thought about like the computer that I had when I first moved to California in 2000. And the iPhone 4 had a higher resolution screen, a faster CPU, more memory, more storage, and a faster wireless internet connection to the cell network
Yeah.
than I was getting, with a wired DSL desktop PC with a spinning platter hard drive that, was like this. It was the size of a desktop PC. It was a big fucking computer.
Yeah.
And I was carrying this thing around in my pocket and complaining that it was too slow to play Peggle on or whatever.
So
So
something iPhone Apollo 11 guidance computer. Like
yeah,
that's
exactly.
just kind of the way of things.
But okay, so there's more examples like Tesla. What Tesla did with batteries is another one, right? They started out selling the Roadster based on somebody else's chassis, basically, and they just built motors and batteries until they had enough. Until that was able to drive enough market that they then could start selling the expensive sedan to rich people, and that let them build battery manufacturing capacity up. And all of that stuff took time because they had to they're literally 10 years ago when Tesla started, there was not enough manufacturing capacity in the world for lithium ion batteries to fulfill the demand of the Model 3 right now, or the Chevy Bolt, or whatever other example you want to use of somebody using lithium ion batteries.
That's the stuff where, I mean, granted, I'm not like the chief product officer of any giant corporations or anything, but like that seems like completely terrifying to place bets like that. I mean, I feel like almost a sense of vertigo thinking about being the guy who is like staking the future of a multi-billion-dollar company on like, let's hope these supply chains come online at just the right time to like
Well, but I mean, I don't think
put
there's
all
a
our
hope.
chips on this. product. Well, yeah, I guess you've got like a lot of good intelligence coming in about like where things are going and what's ramping up and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and like this is like I said, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Tim Cook goes to Samsung and says, "Hey, we're going to want 200 times the amount of flash memory that you make right now. We want to buy that 10 years from now, right?"
Right.
So if they do that in 1999, thinking about an iPhone launch in 2007, I mean, clearly Apple was betting the company on the iPhone launch. We know that,
Yeah.
given kind of how things were going for them before that stuff. But they're letting Samsung know because it takes years to build those factories and build those facilities to bring that stuff online, and memory is just sand plus a little bit of metal, right, at the end of the day. But it's still like it's all of the stuff that turns that sand and the metal, the trace amounts of metal, into something useful is billions of dollars of infrastructure, and it
Yeah.
takes time to build that stuff. So like the manufacturing people will say, look, if you have a lathe, you can build anything, right? Like all of the modern tools start with one. A lathe is just a thing that spins and has a blade on it. Basically,
Yeah.
you can make screws, you can make wedges, you can make all of this other stuff. You can make with a lathe, you can make the gears to make a mill, right? And then with the mill, you make a blah blah blah, and on down the line through the tech tree until we get to memory manufacturing plants.
Yeah.
But it's figuring out where the wedges are and that stuff is the challenge of our time for the smart people.
So I know I've said in the past that I'm trying my best not to make this an Apple-centric podcast, but I feel like they typify a lot of the subjects that we're trying to talk about.
Well, and in a lot of ways, the Android manufacturers literally drafted on what they did.
Oh, totally.
Like
Yeah.
they provided a quantum leap, and then it took 2 or 3 years for anybody else to kind of catch up.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw Android phones before that, but they weren't good until 2011, really.
Right. So, I mean, like you mentioning Apple getting a lot of their memory from Samsung, and I know that I want to say they were getting screens from them too for quite a while. Like that's an interesting example of like on their faces, those companies are like direct and like kind of heated competitors, right? But on the back end, like one of them is relying on the other for some like crucial parts that are coming in. And like Apple seems like a maybe an edge case where they are trying to bring more and more of their supply chain in house, where they presumably want to be making more, if not all, of the parts that go into their stuff.
I they're definitely designing that stuff. I mean, whether they're making it, I don't know who does the manufacturing for the A series of SoCs that goes into iPhones and iPads and
Yeah, I
Apple
mean, I guess
TVs.
they probably don't own their own chip foundries yet or anything crazy like that. But like they do design their CPUs in house, you know?
Yeah, so that was a direct response to them not getting the things that they wanted out of the stock ARM. So something people probably don't know. This is a little off topic, but um, ARM SoCs, system on a chips, ARM provides a set of instructions that it licenses, and then like Qualcomm and Samsung and Apple and a bunch of other companies take those instructions and then figure out what the other bits that go into the SoC are that they want. So like Apple's going to put a big GPU on there, and they're going to put some dedicated machine learning stuff, like math units that do specific types of math that are used in machine learning. They're going to do probably accelerometer, an IMU. They're going to put a compass, and sometimes that stuff is on the chipset, which is other chips on the board. Or sometimes it's just embedded directly in the CPU, and a lot of those decisions are made based on like how often it's used. Like if it's going to be used constantly, Apple puts a lot of, and Samsung and everybody else puts a lot of the stuff that's used constantly, but at very low power on a separate chip. Because it's easier to do that than it is to just figure out how to clock down one individual bit of the ARM CPU. Anyway, Apple brought the design in house because nobody was making stuff exactly the way they wanted it. And they wanted lots of GPU, and they wanted lots of specific stuff so that the phone behaved in the way that they wanted it to because of choices they made with the OS.
Maybe, I don't know if this is kind of a digression, but can they ever own the design for those CPUs outright, or are they always going to have to pay licensing fees to ARM? Like, can they buy like just the design of each chip?
I don't know how that stuff works on the licensing side. That's a good question.
Yeah, because like I heard the same story back in the day about game consoles are a hotbed of weird supply chain issues. Like going back to, let's see, like I want to say it was the 360 where when you bought the hard drive, you were also, because I think you didn't get backwards compatibility on a 360 unless you
had to have the hard drive. Yeah,
bought the hard drive,
because the
right?
Xbox One had a spinning disc, and the Xbox 360 didn't by default.
Well, there was something. I remember hearing the stories where they were having to pay licensing fees to Nvidia, and they were basically bundling those in with accessories with the hard drive instead of like they were cutting costs on the core console.
Oh,
and
that's why
only if you bought the hard drive.
That's why those hard drives were so expensive.
Right. So like I've heard stories for years about like companies owning the IP for their CPU design or not, and having to pay licensing fees over time.
I thought I don't know the specifics. I never read that book about the original Xbox One, but my understanding was that Nvidia had chipset licenses.
Yeah,
because the Xbox One was an Intel x86 CPU, but it was that Northbridge.
Oh, you're talking about the OG Xbox.
I'm talking about the Seamus Blackley Xbox, not the Allard one,
not the product called the Xbox
not
One.
the Xbox with the number one, not ONE.
Yes.
Yeah, so Nvidia had a Northbridge chipset that did the Dolby Digital, it did the direct sound to Dolby Digital and all of that stuff, and I thought that's what they licensed because the CPU and
that may be right,
and it was a GeForce 2 maybe MX
3. It was a 3.
Yeah,
because it had the
transformer lighting.
What was well, no, it was more than that. What was the big DX8 edition? It wasn't pixel shaders, was it?
It was light pixel shaders because you do normal maps and bump maps and stuff like that, diffusion maps.
Yeah, I thought because there were games on the Xbox that did stuff like that. You know, they put out Doom 3 for that thing.
Wow, really?
Oh yeah,
I didn't know that. Yeah, so like the weird licensing stuff ties into that for sure. Like people definitely try to, like Microsoft didn't include a Fraunhofer license for MP3 playback for years and years and years because like you had to buy I can't remember. You had to buy some like weird one-off program to do that. The same thing is happening now with HEIC, the new Apple, Apple's higher efficiency photo compression format that does video and stuff too. You have to buy a separate license for that, or H.264 playback or whatever. I mean, a lot of the stuff ends up getting integrated eventually, but
or like Blu-ray playback on computers is a big one.
Yeah, exactly. Or I mean, you didn't get HD. They didn't. The reason that there wasn't an HD DVD player in the Xbox 360 is probably because Microsoft didn't want to pay the HD DVD consortium's fees unless people were actually going to watch the discs. So they bundle the fees in with the drive, and then that stuff works itself out. I mean, of course, it worked out for Sony because they put the Blu-ray disc in the PS3, and then everybody just like whether you played Blu-ray discs or not, you watched. Yeah. Brad, what do you say we take a quick break and come back and talk about rare earths?
Rare earths?
Rare earths.
That sounds scary, but okay. Okay, well, I've got a question. I'm curious about something. It is kind of supply chain related. I guess we're probably getting a little bit into product design territory, but I mean, I guess the two are pretty intertwined, right? Because you've got to figure out what you've got to work with before you can decide what to build with.
It's all connected, man.
That's right.
Follow the threads.
Beautiful tapestry of endless consumer technology.
As far as the eye can see.
I'm curious, and this is something I'm sure you probably have not gotten a close-up look at, because I would imagine a lot of it is like closely guarded trade secrets, but I'm really curious what the early stages of building products with all this stuff look like in terms of getting stuff into a lab, kind of rapidly prototyping things, like building potential enclosures. You know, like what do the tools look like in a design lab at a major company making consumer tech?
You're right that I haven't seen a lot of this stuff in person because it's all like the ability to make one of these spaces safe for, say, a journalist or just a normal civilian to come in and look around without seeing billions of dollars of IP is challenging.
Right. It's not like they're doing a lot of walkthroughs of Johnny Ive's design lab or anything for Wired or something like that.
I feel like they've let a handful of journalists into these design labs at different times. There was a Vanity Fair article about Johnny Ive a few years ago that had a little bit of detail about how that stuff worked. There have been some Wired pieces, not necessarily about Apple's, but a lot of times what they'll do. So I don't know how they do when they're doing a new product category. Like when they were working on the iPhone, I mean, we've all seen the articles about the 4 different iPhone prototypes and or 7 different iPhone prototypes, or 12 different, depending on who you ask, how they figured out that form factor and that screen ratio and that size and the button on the bottom and the volume buttons on the sides were the right approach. When they're iterating, what they'll do is often there'll be two kind of parallel development paths. One will be the physical form factor changes, where they'll put the old hardware into a new shell so they can like use it as they would a regular phone. So if like this is not a real example, but if they're going to make the back faceted glass and they want to see how that change affects people's ability to hold the phone, put it in their pockets, and stick it on the dashboard of their car, and stick it in the sleeve on their messenger bag, and all the different places that people put phones, then they'll build with like CNC machining tools out of Delrin or glass or whatever, some sort of plastic or styrofoam, even in some cases. They'll build mock-ups and then use those, or they'll build. I want to say with the iPhone 4, the one that Gizmodo bought that the guy left in the bar, they had a case on it that made it look and feel like an iPhone 3.
Yep, that's right.
But it had the iPhone 4 guts inside. So where that works on both sides, both from the aesthetic side, they'll make a fake mock-up, and on the actual like guts and hardware side, they'll disguise that as another device. I feel like they maybe don't do that stuff as much as they used to anymore, because people are a little less crazy about trying to get the hot scoops as they were 10 years ago.
Sure.
But yeah, a lot of them, like those labs, are maker play spaces, right? There's all sorts of cool, like you put a big slab of plastic in, because like Apple's R&D budget is infinite for all intents and purposes. The people who work in there aren't worried about spending a $3,000 piece of Delrin to like carving out all of that to make a fake iPhone. They just do it. I'm sure somebody cares, but my understanding is that Johnny I was just like throwing money in the air like Homer Simpson in the land of chocolate.
It's basically the Mr. Burns Thanksgiving dinner, right? Yeah. Like thousands of dollars worth of food on the banquet table, and he takes one sip of the soup and then dispose of all this.
You can release the hounds. Yeah, exactly. So, I feel like my guess is that somebody above the design lab says, okay, here's what we have to work with. We have a CPU that has this capability, and it's going to have these chips on it, and it's going to have these sensors. And then they take that and they say, come up with 15 different ways to fit this in your pocket, right? And at the same time, the software people are looking at the new capabilities that are going to come online and saying, okay, we have a higher contrast screen, and we have an air quality sensor, and we have a motion sensor that tracks your relative movement 3,000 times a minute or whatever the numbers are. And then they figure out what's going on. And the thing that Apple has consistently done well, and the thing that now Google is doing with their Pixel line, is that they work well. Those two sides are working closely together, rather than just saying, hey, here's the CPUs that we have available, and why don't you go write some software that's just generic for those? You end up with a better result, it seems like. And I think, like I said, what Google's done with the Pixel, even what Samsung's doing with their phones, has proven that out when those sides are working closely together.
Yeah, the reason I was curious about that is that it's easy for me to envision how something gets made out of aluminum and glass and all these kind of high-end industrial materials when I envision a product like a manufacturing line full of robotic arms, like all automatically doing things. Like, it's easy to see how a product with that kind of precision comes out of that environment, but obviously you don't tool those lines up until you've got a final design. So until they get to that step, I'm just sitting here going like somebody sitting there with sandpaper, and I mean, I'm sure it's a lot more high tech than that.
No, they have like high end CNC mills and stuff like that do those things exactly. Yeah. So it's like the tools are there. It's just it's the difference between like building a car on an assembly line versus that guy who 3D printed his kid a Lamborghini. I don't know if you saw that one.
What? Oh.
Yeah, so some guy took a other car chassis and then 3D printed body panels for a Lamborghini, and it looks like a 3D printed Lamborghini made out of pieces that are like, I don't know, maybe 12 inches by 14 inches or something.
Is that street legal?
I can't imagine. Look, there's a lot of bad ideas happening there, but also it's very cool. So what, plastic's cheap, right?
That's another great aspect of the bad future. The ability to execute on bad ideas is almost limitless.
Well, and just to be clear, all of this stuff happened like when we built the first 3D printer that we built and tested in 2010. Those stepper motors were hella expensive, and now because people are using steppers and all the CNC stuff, it's not just high-end CNC mills that would be in an Apple R&D lab. Like anybody can buy a cheap CNC mill to carve circuit boards at home for like $1,500 now or $1,000. 3D printers have driven a lot of that stuff down, even though they're not massively successful. Like we have home laser cutters, and we have home the Cricut is a great example. The vinyl cutter is the most popular CNC device ever made because those things are in thousands and hundreds of thousands of people's homes for like scrapbooking stuff, for craft stuff. And like the stepper motors in those are what makes those things work. It's really
Yeah. The tendency of high end and like exotic tech like that to trickle down into really cheap products just seems to be like the defining story of consumer tech in this era.
It kind of is. It's a little bit disconcerting though, because it means that like I saw somebody complaining the other day that their mom just, instead of buying refills for her printer, just goes and buys a new printer and throws the old one in the trash every time because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And like that's the real concern, because like we use a lot of things that are not, they're not exactly scarce. Like rare earth minerals are a good example of this. So rare earths are, I think, lanthanides. If you look at the periodic table, there's the two spikes on either side. I think the rare earths are the top row of the wide, skinny part. Like, so it's like the third column and then the first row on the long part. And it's stuff like cerium and iridium and europium and neodymium, sorry, and thulium and terbium and lanthanum, and it's all these. It's thorium and yeah, they're found in deposits of like thorium and uranium.
Do you have a good sense of what exactly those roles, those elements, or what roles those elements play in a given device? Like you hear about them all the time, but I don't know if it's like that stuff is going into batteries. I would assume not, but I don't know what else they would do on like a circuit board.
So it's a lot of battery stuff. My understanding is that they have weird, unusual electrical properties in lots of cases. Sometimes magnetic properties, and that's what they're used. That's why they're used specifically. But I don't. That chemistry is beyond me. It's scary. The the
Yeah.
the thing about those rare earths specifically, like they're called rare earths. They're not particularly rare. Like there's lots of places you can get them. There's only a few places where it's relatively inexpensive to mine them, is my understanding. One of them is in China.
Yeah.
And like they don't get recycled as a general rule, because there's very small quantities in most consumer electronics, so those parts just go in the landfill, and our grandchildren will be mining them out in 50 years. So
That is maybe one of the most cyberpunk things I've ever heard. Is the idea? It's the picture of children sifting through like junk piles through the garbage dump.
I don't think they'll be children, Brad. I think they'll just be my grandchildren in 50 years will be 20 years old, 25 years old. So
I mean, when the bad future becomes the worst future, everybody is going to be scrabbling for.
Well, but I mean, if you think about the amount of copper, for example, that was thrown out in landfills in the 50s, it's probably worth mining. Like there's probably parts of the world where it's worth going out and mining up the landfill to get the old copper out from the 40s and 50s. So yeah.
So I mean, the only reason that I'm really even aware of rare earth elements with regard to consumer tech is just because access to them has become so politicized. Like you mentioned, that a lot of them are concentrated in China and that sort of thing. Like I think it felt like some kind of Tom Clancy ass prediction for a while that there were going to be like rare earth wars over resources in the future at some point, but it seems like maybe it's not going to be that dire.
Well, the situation is most of the world let China do the mining because the mining is a little bit dirty, is my understanding. So we shut down our rare earth mines, and then lithium ion batteries became very important, and let's see, I think lanthanum and neodymium specifically became really valuable because lanthanum is used in battery electrodes, and neodymium is used in powerful magnets, which make motors work. So yeah, you like, we shut down those mines, and now we're looking at ways to bring those mines back online without also destroying the environment around the mines or doing new mines or whatever. It's kind of like, this is kind of like the if fracking is the bad example of this, rare earths are the good example of this. Because if we can mine rare earths more efficiently and use them to make electric car motors and electric car batteries, then we can have a local net negative probably for the area directly around the mine, but an overall net positive in terms of reducing carbon emissions for electric cars and silicon panel solar panels and stuff like that.
Okay, so it's not like a small number of companies control the world's supply of those resources. It's more of just a question of making an investment.
Yeah. It's just like building the memory factory, right? Uh, Samsung built more memory factories because Apple was selling a lot of iPods. We're selling a lot of cars and electronics devices and lithium ion batteries, and more people are investing in rare earths. Sometimes capitalism sucks, but sometimes it actually like stuff works out kind of okay.
Yep.
I mean, yeah,
It's this the amoral hand of the market, right?
yeah. We'll call it that.
So yeah, like e-waste is another topic that I thought about when we were discussing doing the show ahead of time. Like phones are the obvious example, right? Of like every phone maker on the planet is trying to drive an annual adoption cycle.
They've kind of slowed down on that, though.
Well, I mean, they're still rolling them out pretty much annually, but like I could see it getting to the point where maybe that goes away.
Yeah. So iFixit talks about this. Kyle Wiens from iFixit talks about this a lot. iFixit is a repair place, and he says, like electronics recycling is the end of the supply chain. That's like the last step. So you like if I don't know what you do with your old phones. Most of mine live in a drawer in my kitchen.
I just reached into my desk drawer and pulled out. I've got 4 phones here.
Is that yeah?
It's got a Windows phone, an iPhone 3G, an old Verizon. Let's see, what is this? An old LG flip phone, an Android phone, hand me down. They tend to pile up.
Well, so one of the things that's happened over the last few years is a lot of people are buying phones on the upgrade plan because the manufacturers are actively encouraging that. Apple and the phone carriers are giving you no cost financing for $1,000 phone over 2 years at like $40 to $60 a month, depending on what the phone costs and what your credit's like. And what you traded in. So at the end of that time, usually you hand the phone back to them and get the new model, and you just keep paying the $40 a month. The economics of that are maybe not ideal. Paying $1,000 for a phone seems a little bananas. That seems a little more palatable, I think, to a lot of people than paying $1,000 for a phone. But yeah, I think we're moving away from the annual. Like I'm still using an iPhone 10. I think I'm probably not. I thought I might upgrade, and I think I'm probably not going to. So it's a 2-year-old phone, and it works great. So why would I upgrade?
Yeah, I'm on an iPhone 8, and like when I got it, I kind of took a hard look at it, and I was like, you know what? Like I'm happy with this as a device. I think I'm just going to try to use this until I don't know. I mean, I started to say until it stops working, but like these things are pretty robust, so it'll probably work for a long time. But like I'm going to see if I can maybe get like let's say 4 or 5 years out of this phone instead of the 1 to 2 that has become traditional. But like that does lead to. Do you think we're at billions of unused smartphones yet?
Yeah, almost certainly.
You think so?
I mean, Apple has been known to sell 1 billion phones in a year in the past.
Okay. So you think there are that many of those just lying around in drawers like this now? Probably there have to be.
So there's 2 things to think about. One is the how do you recycle them, and the rare earths typically don't get recycled because there's not enough of them in the devices to make it worth doing, or it's difficult to separate them. In the case of the batteries, like separate the electrodes from the batteries in a safe way that doesn't make the battery explode and catch fire or whatever. One of the things that Kyle and the iFixit folks always push for is to make the phones more repairable. So if you think about your phone, the reason your phone gets slow often is that the battery becomes less capable of providing uh, a surge current when the CPU demands it, when the CPU spins up. So the CPU then has to run slower so it doesn't crash because it doesn't have enough power. And if you take the old battery out, send that off to be recycled, put a new battery in, the phone feels like it's brand new again. And that's like there's no reason that most people couldn't use a phone longer than the 1500 charge cycle battery will let them use the phone. And Apple has gotten better about doing that. Like now they do battery replacements in the shops. It takes like 20 minutes instead of, having to, in the old days, they would glue the batteries into the phones, and like ungluing a battery from the back of a phone is terrifying because if you mess up at all, you're going to puncture it and it's going to make a bunch of really dangerous white smoke and, make you evacuate the building. So, building the devices from the beginning of the design process to be replaceable, it turns out is a good thing. And we should do more of. It's easier
Yeah,
than recycling the devices themselves, probably in a lot of cases.
yeah. Are you familiar with the Fairphone? Have you read about that thing much?
Is this the open source thing? Is this the
I don't think it's open source. It's out of somewhere in Europe. I want to say it might be Denmark or somewhere like that. But it is like the tagline is the phone that cares for people and planet. But
huh?
the idea is basically a modular smartphone that you can kind of I think it literally comes with a toolkit in the box that lets you take the phone apart. You know, battery, screen, housing, like kind of just the basic parts of a smartphone are made to come apart. And I think it's supposed to be modular so you can upgrade specific components
Is
over
this a thing
time.
you can buy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like I think they're on their third one. I think Fairphone 3 is the newest one.
Oh, this is really
Um,
cool. It runs Android, I assume.
yeah, it's an
Yeah.
Android phone. It sounds like the little bit I've read about it, it's like, moderately decent specs. Like you're not getting a absolute top of the line competitive phone with like Samsung's offerings or anything like that. But it sounds like it's like good enough for a lot of people.
But you can replace the camera when you want a better camera, and man, that's really cool.
Yeah, it really, and I think that there are certain aspects of their supply chain where they talk about, I think, trying to get like conflict free minerals and source all their stuff ethically and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But also just for me, just from the old man, like the grouchy old man perspective of like everything's a black box now. You can't take things apart and fix them yourselves anymore. Like this feels like it's kind of an answer to that in some way. Like it's hard to see this becoming the norm. I think most people like their phones to just be kind of disposable.
Well,
Uh,
Google had a thing a few years ago that was a modular design for Android phones. That was more. It was this is like the build your own PC version of this. That theirs was more like snap some blocks together and put a cover over them,
okay.
and you could add like specific sensors and stuff like that. I don't think they've actually shipped them. They might have really done a beta or something, but this is really neat. I want to look more into this. This is super cool.
It's a cool idea, but it adds some bulk to the device. Like it's not as pretty as an iPhone. Like it's hard to see this really catching on as a mainstream thing, but it's cool that people are out there trying stuff like this.
I mean, it doesn't look. It's not. It's like 10 millimeters thick and 158 millimeters. Yeah, I mean, this is competitive. I'm into it.
Do you think we're getting to a point? I mean, this kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about feeling like my current phone is kind of good enough for the foreseeable future. Like, do you feel like the tech on this type of product is maturing or plateauing enough that like I don't know, maybe we are going to see more stuff like this because there's just not that much left to do with phones as they currently exist.
I mean, I think we've definitely been at that point for a long time on phones. If you think when the iPhone 7 came out, you were kind of looking at like that generation of phones. It was like, oh, this is definitely better, but and the camera's really nice, but I don't know that I'm need to like this is we've reached a point where good enough is good enough for most people. And phones, if you look at PCs, it took from the 90s when PCs kind of started getting mainstream until 2007 or 2008, maybe even 2010 before you kind of it wasn't until really Windows 7 came out that you were like, I'm probably okay for a while. And now like you can run I know people who have Windows 7 computers that don't play games or do video editing and stuff like that. Like they have a early quad core that started as a Windows 7 machine. It runs Windows 10 great, and that computer will last them either until the spinning hard drives die, or they decide they it's worth spending $500 and upgrading to something new.
Right.
So I think we're at that point with phones. I can't. If you'd asked me 5 years ago if I was going to have a phone for 3 years, I would have told you were mad. Now I'm sitting here. I'm like, I don't know if it's worth the 2 weeks of hassle to switch to a new phone at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to be in this place, like it's kind of exhausting trying to keep up with these rapidly updating product cycles. Like it's nice to
It,
just have a thing and have it work for, kind of from now on.
it's comforting to not have everything always in flux. It
Yeah.
turns out.
But
What do you think
speaking of
about?
things being in flux,
Yeah.
I was one last question I was going to ask. Just like, I mean, you're not Tim Cook. You're not in there like looking
God,
at.
I wish I was.
I mean, you don't have access to trade secrets, is what I mean. Like in terms
No.
of,
Well, a few. Just mine though.
part supply that may be spinning up on like snazzy new advanced tech. But like, do you see anything happening right now that tickles your fancy, like in terms of where things might be going as certain things are becoming more like cheaper or more possible to do in terms of what's available?
I mean, the compute thing is huge. Kevin Kelly did a talk about this years ago at XOXO that I was at that was really fascinating. And he was like, look, think about all of the things that are expensive for computers to do right now. and then think about what happens if that cost of doing that computation goes way down. And we're seeing it with image recognition now, right? Like it's happening with the self-driving cars and stuff like that. All of that stuff is feeding into, like, computers getting better at image recognition is making self-driving cars maybe a possibility. It's unclear if that's actually going to happen or not. People are a little bullish on it now, or bearish. Bullish is good and bearish is bad,
Yes.
right? But yeah, so I think that there's a couple of things coming that are going to be impossible for us to predict what's going to happen on the other side of. I think the quantum computing stuff is a big one. I think massive amounts of compute that are available very inexpensively in the cloud is going to dramatically change the way the internet works. Maybe not in a good way.
That seems like a safe bet at this point.
Yeah. I mean, have you been in one of those Amazon shops yet?
No,
With the cameras
I've
in the
seen
ceiling?
some people posting some kind of on the scene reports of all the cameras in the ceiling and stuff like that, and it does not seem like an environment.
There's one by your
Yeah,
office. You should go check it out and do a report next week. Just walk in there. You don't have to buy anything. Just walk in and look around. See how it feels.
All right, I'll think about it.
Speaking of homework, we got some emails.
Oh?
Yeah. Let's see. Do you want to talk about networking or food?
Let's start with the networking.
Okay, so James says, funnily enough, I've been working on a blog series similar to your podcast. I was talking about classful and classless IP networks. We talked about this and I didn't know the answer. He says, classful IP address spaces are standardized blocks of addresses where the subnets are defined by the most significant bits of the addresses are ones. When IP networks started expanding, they needed to chop the address space up into subnets in order to be able to sanely assign the right size blocks to fit the requirements of the organization that needed them. Early on, they just used lots of Class A addresses, but that means that most of the addresses in that block wouldn't get used. So if like your IP address was 1.1.x.x, then that means there's 256 times 256 IP addresses in there. And if you're only using 3,000, then there's like a couple of 100,000 that are just being wasted.
So that stuff makes me realize why there are a lot of networking classes available. Courses, I should say, like educational courses.
Oh, yeah.
Like why there are certifications. Like you start to understand why a lot of schooling is required.
Well, it's the same as always, as everything, right? Like the it's really easy to learn just enough to be dangerous, which is where I have lived my entire life.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's fun.
Yeah,
there.
But to be an expert, you gotta spend some time. So he says the class A, B, and C addresses are the different subnets that are defined as private. So class A is 10.0.0.0 with the subnet of 8. So that means it's basically the 10.15. All of those private addresses are in that range. Class B is 172.16.0.0 with a /12 subnet. So that's 255.250.0.0.0. which means that like part of the third range and the second and the first range are available. And then class C is 192.168.0.0, and that is a 16/16 subnet, which is 255.255.0.0. So what that means is 192.168.anything.anything are private, but 192.167.anything.anything are not private, right? I don't think I can do the math on the class B ones, what's private and what isn't. But on the class A, the 10.0.0.anything are private.
I'll cut you some slack on that.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, and then it's a really long email. I'm not going to read the whole rest of this, but I thought the ABC thing was interesting, and I did not know that. Let's see, we had one more good one here. Jared says, "Hey, you can cook rice in the Instant Pot."
Oh,
yeah. He said if you cook rice on high pressure for about 6 minutes with a 10-minute natural release. We didn't talk about natural versus quick releases at all last week.
I guess that would make a difference, right? Because like the longer that the pressure remains high, if it takes longer to let it out, then that's going to change the dynamics of the cooking while that's happening, right?
It's the difference between flipping the vent so that the extra pressure blasts out really quickly in like 30 seconds versus letting it cool down enough inside that the pressure goes down just because the temperature is reduced inside the pot.
Yeah, it seems like that could pretty easily overcook your food if you're not careful.
He said, don't ever use the rice cooker setting on the Instant Pot because you'll end up with a gummy stuck-on mess, which was precisely my experience. And the benefit, of course, of using an Instant Pot versus, say, a rice cooker is that every rice cooker I've ever seen has a Teflon pan, which Teflon is theoretically okay for you as long as it doesn't ever flake off and get into your food.
Oh, don't say that.
Yeah, I know.
I'm still trying to get over microplastics from last week.
Look, microplastics are just rest assured that your lymph nodes are full of microplastics and will be for the rest of your life.
Microplastics are always with us.
Yes, we'll always have microplastics. Thanks. Thanks, Axe Body Scrub for your contribution to the environment. I don't know if we talked about this in the podcast, but one of the things I love to think about are like what are going to be the geological definers of our age. And I talked to an archaeologist once who was like, "There's two things maybe. One is microplastics. Like there's just going to be a sedimentary layer on our time that is like 10 feet thick, and there's just plastic fucking everywhere in it. The other one is chicken bones.
Wow.
So roaster chickens, we kill trillions of roaster chickens every year.
Is it really that high?
It's a phenomenal number of chickens, and
like I knew it was a lot. I don't know if you saw this thing about Costco is actually spinning up their own chicken farming effort. Finally,
what is the? I'll take the third most dystopian sentence I've heard this week.
Yeah, I mean, the apparently, like I probably should have realized this without being told, but the $4.99 rotisserie chicken at Costco is a loss leader.
That makes sense.
So, yeah, and so they are that intent on keeping that business going that they have finally opened like some like insane, massive, sprawling chicken farm in I think Nevada.
How many chickens can we farm in a year as a species?
I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah,
I don't know. At the same time, are you ready to move to grasshopper?
I've eaten grasshoppers before.
Yeah, I have too. I mean, I'm not saying it's
they're crunchy.
Terrible. Yeah,
I've eaten worse things.
You gotta get protein somehow.
I want to learn about fake meat now. The Beyond and have you had an Impossible Whopper bread?
I still haven't. I haven't gotten around to trying it. I mean, I know it's out there. I've seen it. I think they have it at the grocery store now, right? Like you can just get it kind of raw and ready to cook.
Yeah, you can get like patties and ground beef and stuff like that for beef stew and soups and spaghetti and stuff like that. It's good. Like I've been, there's a burger place by my house that does both Impossible and Beyond burgers, and they're both good. Like the texture is nice. It tastes like real meat. They don't warm up quite right, so you got to eat the whole thing in one sitting. But like if you put one of those in front of me, I don't know that I'd be able to tell the difference between that and a regular real cheeseburger.
Can you tell the difference between the two? Do you have a preference, one over the other, or are they pretty indistinguishable?
I like the Impossible better. Or at least where I've had it prepared. I haven't made them myself. The Beyond has a little bit of gets a little bit of a crustier outside when they put it on a griddle or a grill or whatever. And I like a little bit more of a tender burger than a crunchy burger. But like if you like your smash burger, maybe go with the Beyond. Definitely worth trying.
And are those things ethical to produce? Do you have any idea? I guess that's the thing to talk about, right?
I mean, you're not killing an animal to make them.
Well, yeah, sure.
Like the net carbon contribution to the atmosphere, and water usage is probably dramatically lower.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to be worse than beef in terms of like environmental impact.
That is very fair.
Like you could maybe go out and punch a couple of nuns or something if you wanted. If you burn down some forest and then slaughter the cow, it's a little bit worse, I guess.
Here I was worried we weren't going to come up with an episode title before the thing was over.
You're welcome. So yes, I guess that's it for us. I feel like we should maybe start plugging what we're going to do next week at the end of these, but we haven't talked about that yet. So
yeah, we need to start planning what we're going to do next week before we can start talking about it.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
We've gotten a lot of good feedback. If you have specific like feedback about audio quality or stuff like that, I think we've made some big strides in the last couple of weeks on that.
Yeah.
So that we know the first few episodes were rough, but I think from definitely 4 on, and I think 3 was pretty good too, as I recall. I can't. It's all blending together now. Yeah. We'd love to hear what you think. We'd love to hear topics that you guys want us to dig into. If there's things you would like, if you have ideas for segments and stuff like that, we're into that as well. And as always, leave those reviews on iTunes because that helps. Like it turns out, getting good reviews on iTunes is the best way to get new people listening to a podcast. Still in 2019,
even bad reviews.
You're not allowed to say don't leave. Only leave good reviews. That's frowned upon.
No such thing as bad publicity.
You can find us at Sweatpants Tech on Twitter. The email address is techpod@content.town, or you can hit us individually on Twitter. I'm Will Smith.
I am Brad Shoemaker.
See you all next week.